Welcome to Tool Talk Episode 7, the official podcast for Jonard Tools. Today we have myself, Ed Cerbona, Senior Director of Engineering, Wayne Bunce, our North American Sales Director, and our special guest today, Bridget Costigan, our Product Manager at Jonard Tools. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so with that, Bridget, why don't we start, and this is what we've done with other guests, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself, some of your background, and we'll take it from there.
Sounds good. So I guess I'll start at the beginning. Right when I graduated school for marketing, I started working at Schneider Electric, which is a huge electrical company, global company, and had several roles in sales and then marketing and then working with product marketing before moving down to New York to come work for Jonard Tools. So I came to Jonard to head up the marketing group, actually. And in the past year, I moved into this new role as product manager. So along the way, I've had to ask Ed and Wayne tons of questions. And in my mind, I kind of relate everything back to electrical. So I had basic training of electricity and how it flows from power plants through telephone lines into the house, out the plug and the outlets in your home.
I hope they're not flowing on telephone lines.
I have
just for reference,
a rough understanding just to get through and have kind of this infographic in my mind of how it works, and it helped me understand all of the tools needed in that industry. So I'm asking Ed, how can that relate into this industry with communications, how it flows and how it works and how
I can tell we are rubbing off on you because you use the term telephone pole. I've never heard someone out of the electrical industry refer to it as telephone pole. What they refer to it as? Utility pole. Because they're the ones that really have ownership of that. They may have arrangements and easements and some kind of contracts with like a Verizon or somebody like that. But they're the ones that actually own the poles. So I know we're rubbing off on you.
So the landline infrastructure works exactly like the power lines.
Okay.
Where there's a substation pushing it out through the ground to a pedestal or cross connect that's someone's neighborhood. So it is almost the same, just not as much power.
So what is like a substation?
Central office. I guess that would be the best. Yeah, central office is where I guess it's where the switch is. Somewhere in.
I would break that out a little bit more. Think more of the central office as a major power generation site. Now, hear me out. Then going out into the areas, you have your remote terminal units, which are the equivalent of substations. Mm-hmm. So they're the objects that are helping branch out the circuits from the main trunk, because main trunk in electrical is your transmission towers, which is coming from your wherever that base power plant is. There isn't just one power plant in the U.S. There's many, and in the same token, with the telephone or telco world, there are many central offices. Pretty much every town has one. So that is the equivalent there. The equivalent here, or this is where there's an equivalent, but where it starts to diverge, is on the cabling. Mm-hmm. The cabling really hasn't changed tremendously over the last 100 years in the electrical world, where in the telephone, I won't even say telephone anymore, the communications world has had a major explosion over the last 30 years, and things are in a constant state of flux, if you will. So there is some similarity. They both use cables. They're both copper. mostly. Okay, that is changing, and we'll get into that. Okay, but there's copper world, and from there, because communications low voltage, and obviously transmission, distribution, and into the home are much higher voltages. So the cabling is different. It's just copper related.
So then along the tops of the telephone lines or utility poles is the really high voltage wires that you don't want to get near, obviously. And then as they get closer to a building or your home, they go through like step down transformers into the 120 volts that you get out at our outlets. But is it similar for communications lines? Like there's large cables running along the poles, not as high up as the utility lines because there's not much voltage going through the communication cables, and then it gets to your neighborhood and it splits out and goes to your house. And we each only have, one or two telephone lines coming to our house, a cable TV line or our offices.
So interesting. Back in the 90s when I was 5, Ed and I actually sat down with an engineer from AT&T, and for the life of me, I cannot remember the guy's name. But he diagrammed how wire was ran from the central office to a neighborhood. It was really interesting because it's actually a circle. In case the line gets cut in one direction, they can redirect all the phone traffic going the opposite way. But the cable, like I've seen them come into the vaults in the bottom of the central office where they're huge. Like I can't it's like they're huge. I can't get my arms around some of them. They're so big. And from there, they break out, which they call the vertical side. They run all the cable up, and then they
vertical
use
side
the
of the main
of
the main frame, main distributing frame.
Yes. Yeah. So there they would break it up. But to answer your questions, going backwards from the central office into a neighborhood, it's either buried or aerial, and the cables are large leaving, and they break those cables down per neighborhood. So one neighborhood needs like 100 cable lines. They'll break out that and put it into a cross connect box. And then from there, they'll either run it to a pedestal and then to an actual house. So the wire does keep gradually getting smaller, and that's copper. Now we're on fiber. It's kind of different, but the same.
I guess that's one key difference with communications cabling than electrical is that there needs to be a two-way street, or is that the same in both? Like electricity is just going from plant to plug and you're using it, but communication for it to work, it's two-way. So a telephone started because it was a copper cable with two, Ed taught me, twisted pairs with, your voice is going this way, the other person's voice this way. So that's one difference.
There's the key difference in this is definitely that communications is two-way. Electrical is one way.
Right.
You're only distributing it outward. Now, in the electrical world, there is a whole communications element that is bidirectional because from remote locations they are controlling switches, contactors, and stuff like that inside the substations to direct current flow, always trying to keep the system balanced. But that's the extent, generally speaking, of their communication, is control the equipment, monitor the equipment, and if somebody is in there, have the ability to communicate. So they do have a communications element to it. As a matter of fact, even they have fiber deployment now as well. It all has to do with the ability of protection and electromagnetic protection. So it's not easy to just tap into fiber, but it's pretty easy to tap into copper cable and steal information. I mean, I was showing somebody recently, but I mean, literally, you could take one of our tools and just walk up to an analog
Should probably cut
cable
this out.
and put the probe right up to it and listen to a conversation. I was showing somebody at Mike, was it you? At my house, and I put it up and I call and you could listen to the conversation. So in that realm, it's pretty easy to steal. Communication, and if I'm able to listen, I'm able to tap into it. On the fiber optic side of things, you can't do that.
Didn't you say when telephones first came out, you could the whole neighborhood would share a line, so you could
The
pick
whole
up and
neighborhood,
listen
yeah.
to?
They were known as party lines. So literally, the house 5 miles away, because you probably had one main line going through a more rural area. You pick up your phone, and maybe they're talking to the mother or whatever. They're having a conversation, and you need to make a phone call. You say, "Oh, would you mind? I need to make a phone call. Can you let me know when you're done in 5 minutes or something like that? Or in 5 minutes, can I use it?" And you'd have to hang up.
That's crazy.
My mother-in-law was a switch operator.
Cool.
So they would have someone that actually would sit there and unplug the line and plug it into another outlet.
Exactly.
Like in Mad Men, all the ladies working on the
and that's very real.
Yeah,
that was very real.
So you'd have to tell the operator you wanted to connect to whatever line, and they'd have to transfer you over manually.
I was gonna say Cincinnati Bell has like a time capsule in a central office in Cincinnati, Ohio, where their technology has evolved, and they've gone from the old solder lines where they were soldering, and then they went to the wire wrap, and now they're using fiber. And like I said, 10, 15 years ago, there'd be about 5 to 10 people work in a central office. Now there's none. They rotate people in, but it's usually a guy sitting behind a computer switching the lines around. It's because it's all fiber.
Yeah, because remember when we started, back when we started dealing, you and I, was probably late 90s, you'd go into a central office, there would be maybe a half dozen people, and what they were doing was usually maintenance, moving wires, there's a loose wire here, tracing a problem and stuff like that. They did a lot of maintenance. Back before then, central offices were fully manned. You were pulling wire off here, moving wire over here because John moved from one side of town to the other side of town. Okay, it still had the same phone number, so that's how you would move the wires around. And it's physically taking them off their connection and moving them somewhere else. Now it's just, key in stuff and it's done.
What happens if someone just cuts the line, or like a rabbit chews through it?
So I can answer. They move you to another pair, and that's why a guy would be in a central office. So one of the lines went down. They could literally, in that central office on the horizontal side of the central office, they would move your cable to another location.
Wow.
So that's why it was a big ring. I think the only way
giant batteries and relays and switches and things.
The batteries, it's funny you bring that up. The telephone system in and of itself was originally designed to be independent of the power grid as part of a safety measure in case the United States was ever attacked. The whole premise was to try and have communication still working, not be dependent on the electrical grid, knowing that that's what somebody attacks you, that's probably one of the things they're attacking first.
Makes sense.
So in the bottom of these central offices are massive battery packs. Massive. Just banks and banks and banks and banks of them. And usually what's next to them is, I've seen it, old farm tractor or the motor out of a farm tractor. And you're looking and saying, what the hell is that for? That farm tractor runs a generator to recharge those batteries.
Wow.
Yeah, and periodically they got to go in and be maintained and stuff like that. I honestly, I gotta believe that part of the system still exists, Wayne. I haven't been in a central office in years. I gotta believe that part of that infrastructure still exists.
Yeah, I haven't been in a CO for a long time either. I don't think hardly anyone goes into COs anymore.
Yeah, I don't think. But
how could they
somebody's got to
possibly
be.
undertake that? Moving from all those physical lines to just like a computer, like in such a small footprint and such a small amount of
It's
time.
amazing
It's like,
because if you look at the central offices that exist, so there's one room with all these wires that still come in, but then now there's all these empty rooms. All those empty rooms used to have large computers in them, all kinds of large switching equipment and stuff like that. And before that, they used to have banks and banks and banks and banks and banks and banks of relays. And you walk in there and all you'd hear is click, 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 click. All the relays switching, transferring calls to wherever the heck it is they're going. I in the early days, in the late 90s, I actually went into a central office that still had that, in all places in the middle of downtown Stamford. They had one room with it left. Wow. I was like, how can that be? This is Stamford. Come on. In a fairly modern city,
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna end the podcast now. I'm gonna close out by saying thank you, Bridget, for joining us today.
Thank you guys for having me.
We really appreciate it. And
anytime.
With that, Wayne and Ed and Bridget signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.